Well, thank you, friends. It's a matter of great honor, privilege, and joy to be here with you. And I know and I have seen that this is a gathering of inspired people, in spite of the age, in spite of the weather, in spite of the city. There is a purpose in your eyes, in your mind, and therefore I feel very privileged to say something before you. Now, I was asked to speak on the challenges that India faces in education and what has to be done with the education system in India now, so that India can live up to not just the expectations of others, but India can itself be what it has been denied to be for the last several hundred years. That it has to be a truly mentally free nation. And all this comes with education. It cannot come without education. Now, you are all well-informed people, so there is no reason for me to start with an introduction about the problems and things. I would come straight to the point as to what has been wrong with the Indian education system and what is to be set right. Now, I have a reputation of being a little blunt in my speeches, and you can see my dozens of videos on the internet, because I don't think we have enough time to just beat about the bush. If we want to do something, then let's identify the hurdles, let's identify the problems, put our minds to how to get over them and start something. Now, the Indian education system, unfortunately, continues to be what it was envisaged to be in 1832 by Lord Macaulay. There is no need for me to speak about that because we are all very familiar with it. It has not changed. It could have changed with independence, but something very strange, not unexpected, but strange happened. The strange thing that happened was that instead of Sardar Patel, who was nominated to be the next Prime Minister by the Congress Working Committee unanimously, it was proposed by Mahatma Gandhi that Jawaharlal Nehru should. Now, that could not have made a big difference if it was somebody other than Jawaharlal Nehru. But because it was Jawaharlal Nehru, it made a radical difference. And the difference it made was total inaction. Because Jawaharlal went to England at the age of 11. He went to, I think he went to Harrow. Then he went to Cambridge, came back as a lawyer and joined practical politics. He was a brilliant person. He spoke wonderful prose in English, but he did not speak any single Indian language properly. Now, I am saying this because I have seen Jawaharlal from the age of 6. I was taken to Jawaharlal's home when I was 6-year-old, because that was the time when he was entertaining any child who had his birthday. So I went on my birthday, and then because I lived in Delhi, And Jawaharlal was projecting himself as the Chacha Nehru of the children. So almost every year I would meet him. That is my school and a bevy of children. And I saw the whole era. And I saw him maybe 2-3 times a year as a growing child till he passed away in 1964. Now I'm saying all this because I want to convince you that I'm not saying something which I have read from journals or because I have any political inclinations. I am talking just from my experience, what I have known and seen right from childhood. Now, the education system was decided by Jawaharlal in the debates that happened in the Constituent Assembly, and it was decided and made into law in 1950. What is it that went wrong in 1950? There is not much point in talking about what Macaulay did, because Macaulay did what he should have done. After all, he was a British imperialist. He wanted to execute the white man's burden to bring the natives into light. So if he brought in all that education, British education, with total contempt for whatever was the Indian list of texts, then nobody should blame him. I don't blame him. But the transition which should have taken place in 1950 did not take place in the vision for education. It did not take place entirely and primarily because of Jawaharlal Nehru. You see, let's be very clear. If I don't know something, if I don't know even the ABC of it, then I'll not know the beauty of it, the depth of it, the thoughtfulness of it. So if Jawaharlal Nehru didn't know a single Indian language, and you know, I heard him in 1957 for 1 hour. I was 11 years old. An uncle of mine who used to live, he's dead now, he used to live in Denver. He moved here in 1954. He was visiting, so he took me. He also wanted to hear Jawaharlal, and we both stood there in Ramlila ground, and we heard Jawaharlal speak in his broken pidgin Hindi for 1 hour. There were thousands of people. He was a leader, undoubtedly. Nobody should contest that. However, as an academic, I know what you lose when you don't know a language of a country, because then you never know the country. If you don't know the language, you can never know that culture. You can never know that people. You can never communicate. And this was exactly Jawaharlal's problem. So what did he do with the education system? If you are familiar with the Indian Constitution, the Indian Constitution has a very problematic article. Article 28. And the first section of that article is that in no institution which is either partially or fully supported by the state, there can be any religious instruction. This is Article 28. There is Section 2, Section 3, which are not relevant so much to what we are going to discuss today. Now, what happened in India, right from the beginning, right from 1950, was that a very peculiar interpretation of this word instruction, religious instruction, was put into practice. So what did religious instruction mean then? Religious instruction meant that any text which has vaguely to do with religion, Hindu religion, Islamic religion, Sikh religion, those were the three denominations, Christian and Parsi, could not be part of instruction from, let us say, primary class till PhD. So neither in school, nor in a college, nor in a research institute. Which means that the Indian education system would not teach any of the so-called religious texts. Now it's very easy to identify the Bible as a religious text, the Quran Majid as a religious text. Maybe one for the Buddhist, you'll again have the same problem as to which text, you know. But when it comes to so-called Hinduism, then almost everything, because it is part of the ancient tradition, becomes a religious text, not just the Bhagavad Gita. So you cannot teach the Vedas, you cannot teach the Upanishads, you cannot teach the Shastras, you cannot teach the Kafyas, you cannot teach the Ramayana, you cannot teach the Mahabharata. And any sensible man would ask, then what can you teach? And the upholder of the Indian Constitution said, nothing, no religion. We will not teach obliquely any text in the school or in the college or in the research department which has something to do with religion. This is section 28, that's article 28, section 1. Now, then article 29 creates a category of minorities. And it says that minorities, in order to protect their language and culture, can manage their own institutions or can make efforts. And in Article 30, you give them a right to have their institutions and teach whatever they want, or teach religion, teach religious instruction. So Article 30 then becomes a total contradiction of Article 28.1. Right? So, the Christians get to manage their schools, make their own syllabus, do the teaching, what and where, nobody can challenge them. I went to a well-known Christian college in Delhi called St. Stephen's College, and in the morning they had full service. Well, it was beneficial to me because then I could, hear certain passages of the Bible, and I'm not ignorant of the Bible. But then everybody else in that college is ignorant of any other religious text except the Bible. So you see, this is what the combination of Article 28 and Article 30 has come. Now, if you look at it, not just from the religious point of view, because I'm not making a plea for discrimination against Hindus. I'm talking about the consequence. That what do you end up doing? You throw out of the window all the texts of a civilization. Because you call them religious texts. See, this is the first mischief you do. you. For instance, let's take an example from the West. There is now a commonly accepted idea that the so-called Western civilization begins with the Greek text. So the first text of the Western world, which means Europe, United States, part of South America, the first text would be the Iliad, right? By Homer. The second text would be the Odyssey. Now, for the Greeks, they were very religious texts because they were the text of their forefathers, they were the text of their heroes, they were the text in which the conduct of right and wrong and what is to be done, who is to be worshipped, who are the gods and how do the gods behave, all that is there for the Greeks. But in Europe, they are called classical texts.
They are called what?
Classical texts.
Classical texts.
And they are also called, not now so much, but earlier when the Europeans started studying them, text of the heathens. That the Greeks were great, that the Greeks were fine, that the Greeks were brilliant, the Greeks had Homer, the Greeks were classic, but they were heathens and they were non-Christians. However, they became part of the education syllabus. So till mid-20th century, any university worth its name would not give a BA degree unless you knew Greek and Latin, at least elementary Greek and Latin. In the 19th century, you had to write in Greek and Latin in order to get a tripos from Cambridge. So you see, the Christian West and the West, which also gave birth to socialism and Fabianism, which was the doctrine of the day in Cambridge when Jawaharlal Nehru went to Cambridge. He was a Fabian in Cambridge. There was a double policy that the text which are valuable to us will be part of our educational system, although they are not religious texts, but they would be part of the education. Whereas in India, the classical texts would not be part of education because they were religious texts. You understand? So the Greek heathen text would be acceptable, but the Hindu text would not be acceptable. Now this is the prejudice which Jawaharlal carried. And in 1950, what he did was, he combined this prejudice with another prejudice. The other prejudice was that we shall not have religious texts, but we will make a concession to the minority, largely the Muslim minority, because they were the largest in number, and because this was soon after partition of the country, so that they could preserve their culture. Now, any sensible man would say that culture is not dependent upon the number of people studying it. If 5 people want to study of a denomination, then they would like to study the same cultural things as 500 people. You see? So why do you create this whole category of minority? And then why do you allow them to study primarily religious texts and give them the freedom to do the text? So that's how in India, in the education system, we have a category of so-called religious schools which are maintained by various religious denominations, and the bulk of them are the madrasas. And then there are some religious schools maintained by Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, etc., which claim minority status under Article 30. And you have, on the other hand, the public school. You have the syllabus given by the state, the state, the country, the parliament, in which all the classical texts from Rig Veda are eliminated. So what happens then is that when somebody does a BA, even today, he has no knowledge of any religious text. Now, the so-called Hindu texts, they become religious texts whether they are religious texts or not. You see, this is the biggest problem. If you were to say that there will be 5 Hindu religious texts which will not be part of education system because we don't want religious texts, let us say the 4 Vedas and Bhagavad Gita, these 5, then you have another 25 like Kalidasa, then you can have other texts like the Dharma Shastras, or you can have hundreds and hundreds of texts written in Sanskrit. But if a text is written in Sanskrit, therefore it becomes a Hindu text and a religious text, then what you have is a very perverse system of defining what text you should read and what text you should not read. So Jawaharlal was a victim of 3 things. Number 1, his absolute ignorance about anything Indian, any Indian text or any Indian language. First hand, I'm not talking of learning through English, because learning through English is a very different affair. You know, we can learn all kinds of things through English. Number 2, of the concession that he made on grounds of religion to the minorities, so-called minorities. And number 3, that because he was a Fabian, so he was against any kind of religious instruction. Now that thing continued during his time, and it did the great disaster which it did, because we had then from, let us say, 1950, 60, mid-60s till the time I went to college in 1964, full one generation of people who were totally uninformed in any Indian text whatsoever. Right? The only older text people would be acquainted would be the text they may have had read at their home. You see, if the father introduced the text, like my father introduced several texts to me, like the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, etc., at an early age. So unless your cultural heritage, your cultural text came to you from home, you were devoid of it. And then there was also the problem of employability. What kind of job are you going to get? So almost till the period of so-called period of liberalization under the Indian socialist state, you would seek a job with the government, and the government job would be through the medium of English. So all you had to know was good English, and English saw to it that you, under these articles, the education, you don't study these things. In 1971, something else happens. We had a war with Pakistan, the birth of Bangladesh. This is the time when, who was it? President Nixon.
Yeah.
Who sent the 6th Fleet into the Bay of Bengal and threatened, and then Russia helped India, and you know the history, Bangladesh was born. In 1972, 2 things happened. I get a job at Delhi University, I start teaching. But somebody else gets a very important job. That is Professor Nurul Hassan. He gets the job of the education minister. And under the Soviet influence, he starts an unashamed, naked Marxification of the Indian education system. Now I have seen this whole thing with my eyes. You see, how Professor R.S. Sharma and D.N. Jha and various other people were brought in, forcibly appointed into Delhi University, and then a little later JNU in 1967 was established, and they never taught any single Indian text. They offered me a job in 1976 at JNU. There used to be at the linguistic department one Professor Daswani, who, whenever he would meet me, he would say, "Kake athe aaya," boy, young boy, come over to JNU. And I said, but to do what? You teach linguistics, which has nothing to do with India, because you don't teach Sanskrit in JNU. You teach linguistics, which is purely European linguistics. And thank you, I have read it on my own. I don't have to, change my job. Now this system continued, and slowly it acquired a great hostility towards whatever was Indian. And not just Sanskrit texts, but all the texts in all Indian languages. All the, 28 official and couple dozen other unofficial languages. See, it's a matter of attitude. When you teach a student that only this is worthwhile, then the student would read the worthwhile. He'll never investigate. So, the education system to this day continues to be really deprived of its own texts. Now, every civilization is made by the text that it has preserved. You see, we can very vaguely talk about what is Western civilization or what is Eastern civilization. But if you want to point your finger at something specific, then you go to the text. So for the whole Christian world, the cardinal text is the Bible. For the whole Islamic world, the cardinal text is Quran and Majid. Other things come later, hadith and this and that, but that's the fundamental text. Civilizations are defined by these texts. And as we saw, in the 14th century onwards in Europe, Europe came out of the clutches of Christianity by reading the text of the Greeks and the Romans. There would have been no Renaissance, no rethinking about what is this world, if they did not acquaint themselves with the Greek and the Roman text, painting, art, poetry, sculpture, drama. A whole new civilization was born. The civilization of Renaissance. Of course, they did what they did in their own interest. It was not in India's interest or China's interest, because they colonized and ravaged and plundered, and they didn't take perhaps what was sensible from the Greeks, you see. They took the worst of the elements of the Greek civilization, but they made a civilization of their own. It was on the basis of texts. Now, that was denied to India from 1950 onwards. And for that, India has to blame nobody else except herself and her leaders and her educators, her professors, her members of parliament, her legislators. Not Lord Macaulay anymore, because it's been 70 years since we can make our own system. Now, where do you go from here? what do you do? How do you bring these texts back into education? What are the methods of doing it? And what are the possible systems of doing it? So, the first thing that you have to do is you have to look at texts not as texts of a religion, but texts as heritage, texts as knowledge. You see, so long as you divide the text as a religious text, and you say that this can be taught and this cannot be taught, you will never teach any text in India. But when you say that, look, these are the texts which were composed in India, or even brought into India, like the Bible and the Quran and several other texts, but these are the two major ones. And because there are people who follow these texts, so these texts have to be part of the education system. Unless you radically alter your approach. Now, this also means something very different. This means if you want to study these texts, then you have to study and know the languages in which these texts are written. You are not going to kind of rent it out to somebody else to translate these texts or to rewrite for you. I mean, that is what we have done. We read the Rig Veda in English, or at some stage later on in some Indian language. We read the Gita. How many of us read it in Sanskrit? Not only the texts, but all the arts and the sciences which are part of those texts. All the sociology, all the social systems. The social systems which are very clear, like yesterday we went into Manusmriti, and it was an eye-opener for the people who came as to what is the content of Manusmriti. Today you just think that Manusmriti is caste system and lack of education for women. But when we read the Kama Shastra yesterday, then we find clear injunctions that women should be educated soon after marriage, their education should be continued. It's there in black and white, but you would not read it. Why? Because you don't know the language. And also you don't think that this text is worth reading. You think of Kama Shastra as just gymnastics for sexual postures. You don't see the whole vision of it. Now, this exactly is the problem with the Indian education system. In simple language, if the Greek and the Roman texts created a new civilization for the Christian West and created a powerful, strong civilization, and a civilization which gave birth to the natural sciences and modern technology. That was the crux of it. Then why can India not read its own text? We don't have to go to somebody else's text. Like the Europeans had to go to the Greek and the Roman texts. And then to declare that Greece and Rome is our intellectual forefather. This is a hoax. There's very little in Greek and Roman culture which is Christian or which is European. As a matter of fact, Christianity is responsible for destroying the ancient culture of Greece and Rome. Who are the people who destroyed Rome? Who are the people who destroyed Greece? Christians. They are the ones who destroyed everything. They broke the temples, they vandalized, they killed the philosophers at a particular time. And it is the same text which they burned, which they vandalized, the art which they plundered in 4th and 5th and 6th century till 11th century, it's the same art which gave them a new civilization when they started studying it from 14th century on. How could you have Shakespeare if there was no Christopher Marlowe before him and Ben Jonson, who had read Aeschylus and Euripides, the Greek playwrights? So the whole civilization came into it. Now this is the problem. India has not been able to revive itself culturally because it is still to this day divorced from its texts, and more than divorce, it has developed a hatred for them. Because when Marxism came, Marxism promoted in the academia the stereotype that whatever is in Sanskrit is Hindu, bourgeois, reactionary, anti-Marxist, and it should be kept at bay.
Feudal.
And hence,
Feudal.
And so far from studying it, you should not even mention it. You should not even talk about it. And if somebody ever happened to study, then he should be punished. Now, I'm not exaggerating. I tell you, I'm not exaggerating, because I was punished in Delhi University for 40 years because I knew Sanskrit. I was punished. People did not accept that I should be the head of the English department and a full professor. They saw to it that I should not be. My only fault was, and I used to tell them, look, I also know Greek. They say, yes, that's okay. I mean, I was invited to half a dozen Greek departments in North America, Berkeley and Toronto and others, to talk about my understanding of Greek theatre. And I'm an acknowledged scholar of ancient Greek drama by the Greeks. I am an awardee of the Onassis Senior Fellowship. But in India, they saw to it that I do not get an opportunity to teach from the top something like 50 or 60 students. Now this is exactly the problem. And this problem cannot be solved unless we radically alter our faith in what is good and proper. You see, it's not a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of acquaintance. If you are not acquainted with the text, if you are not acquainted with what has happened, then you live in absolute ignorance. And the consequence is this, that today, the people who sell their books about what is, for instance, the Dharma Shastras or certain philosophical texts are the ideologists of Chicago and Pennsylvania and Harvard. So you see, they have captured the whole knowledge system. And they are the ones who are dishing it out to JNU and Ashoka University and Delhi University. They would not read my book. You see? They would not read my book on Greek theatre. Although my book is read all over the world, and it is in all libraries of America, but in Delhi University, it is not prescribed. See the kind of hostility. When my book has been printed 5 times, you go to any library, maybe even this library has a copy of it. But the animosity is so severe, and this is suicidal. And we have to think seriously as to how we have to come out of it. As I said, one thing is not to look upon it according to religious division. Secondly, we have to start teaching. We have to simply strike down this Article 28(1), which says no religious instruction. It should be there would be religious instruction, because religion is not something which dehumanizes. See? And we should give religious instruction in schools, talking about the major aspects of every faith which is lived in India. And we should talk about it, and we should educate our children. And similarly, we should accept all the other texts which have been produced in various Indian languages in different parts of the country, and they should become part of the study. Then you really know what is your history, and what is your history as surviving in the present time. How to think about a classical text, or a modern text, or an art form. So if you don't know what is your art form, then you get somebody like our friend T.M. Krishna, who comes around and says that South Indian music is Tamil Brahmin music. All that. It was the Brahmins who revived North Indian music in the 20th century, when more than half the musicians in North India are Muslims. My teacher in Rudra Veena was Asad Ali Khan, a Muslim. But University of Chicago brings over T.M. Krishna, and T.M. Krishna, gives this whole theory about how the evil Brahmins do not teach Carnatic music to non-Brahmins, or how the the Maharashtrians have capitalized over Khayal Gaiki and modern Hindustani music. Something which is simply factually not true. This is the neo-colonization that India has now entered. India again has fallen into that same point when the minutes for education were written by Macaulay. Because when you are totally ignorant, then you can easily be made subservient to somebody who knows a little, and who claims authority, and who claims legitimacy. And that is what the American universities and professors claim. And they advise the Indian government. The Vice Chancellor of Houston University, what's her name? This lady, I forget her name. She's the Vice Chancellor. Yes. She's appointed by the UGC as an advisor. And she has not been able to establish a proper Department of Indian Studies in Houston. Does anybody remember her?
I forget the name, yes.
Yeah.
She's a Punjabi lady, I think.
No, she's a Maheshwari lady. It's just that I'm forgetting her name. Everything else about her I remember. Look at the problem.
Is it Renu Khator?
Renu Khator. So she is an advisor. But I've been visiting Houston for past 10 years, and I've been visiting the university, giving lectures and making inquiries that, are you able to have a Department of Indian Studies? And they say, yes, if somebody gives us money, we'll have it. But then whom will you appoint? Well, we'll ask so and so. Now this is the neo-colonial problem of Indian education. It has to change. It is not a political problem. It is not a Hindutvavadi problem. It is not Hindutva which is standing in way, because if Hindutva was standing in way, then Hindutva would have performed in last 4.5 years and Modi would have changed the education system. No, it cannot change. Because the kind of vision that is needed to change is not a political vision. It is a proper cultural understanding rooted in the self-respect of the people. And people who know hands-on. You see, people who have worked in India, who belong to India, and who know the textual traditions of India, along, of course, with the textual traditions of the West as well. But they should know what is the real thing to be introduced and taught, and then how to be taught. It's going to be different when you teach it at, let us say, primary level, then at middle level, then at high school level, then at university level, then at PhD level. It's all going to be different methodology, different methods, different strategies, and in different regions of India also it has to adjust to various places. But India is caught up in a lot of jargon of Aryan versus Dravidian, so they don't want to learn any North Indian language in Tamil Nadu. They have lost, Tamil Nadu has academically just gone to dogs. It's one of the richest place in India as far as learning is concerned. Still, there is so much of good scholarships, art, poetry, you name it, which survives there. But all that is submerged under a political hegemony of the Dravidianist party. So a very big change is needed, and I think that those of you who are here have to speak out about it in a different fashion, not as friends of BJP or friends of Congress or friends of this, but as people who can look upon the whole history of India dispassionately. It has to be that, because the ways of education are not mysterious, and they are in some respects culture specific, but in many respects they are universal. Education is given about the texts which are traditional texts that belong to the nation, belong to the people, and it is given in a rational manner. It is given through a rigorous methodology, and these methodologies are not that different world over. They are pretty much the same. So it is not as if there is a rocket science to it. And India has systems. India still has remarkable systems of education, because the culture of India is still being supported by whatever has survived through the traditional systems. There's a system of teaching the language. I'm not talking of teaching of language in modern Indian universities, but I'm talking of languages which are taught through the traditional Pandits. I learned how to study Sanskrit text from traditional Sanskrit Pandits in the traditional manner. And I know how a text is to be read. Something which just, let us say, somebody who has been just to Oxford or Delhi University or JNU would simply not know, because you're not familiar with that methodology. If you want to know what are the performing arts of India, then you can't learn them in a modern conservatory here. You have to learn it from the teachers, the gurus, who make you practice that art and teach you right in front of you. I did 10 years of sitar under Pandit Uma Shankar Mishra, disciple of Pandit Ravi Shankar, sitting face to face. That's the only way. And that's the methodology of teaching one-to-one. And that is a traditional Indian methodology, and it has no place in the university system. So there is a lot of schizophrenia, there is a lot of colonization, and there is now the possibility of a neo-colonization. With these words, I thank you for listening to me. And
before we take a break, can you say a little about your book? I think you forgot, and
yes,
then pass it around.
Okay. And then we will have a question session.
Yes,
but thank you for
break.
reminding me. This is a book which is now old by modern standards. It's 2008. This is about, it is called India, a Cultural Decline or Revival. So it's a question mark which I put. In this, I take up the questions of education and art. Primarily, the whole book has a series of essays, and the book also follows a different pattern of sociological analysis. It does not follow the standard Western pattern of sociology in terms of ethnography, people belonging to different ethnic groups, etc. It follows a different pattern, and it's very inexpensive. You can order it from Amazon. So I guess we would have now a tea
before we
break.
do that, just for a minute, we have another distinguished member of our community, Dr. Sarada Punasanti, the Sapna organization. She's not only an author, she's a psychologist also, I should say, propagating to Annamacharya's treatments and things like that, and she's doing this for more than 30 years in this country. Also going to go to India also to do this. So we have a traditional person here.
We would like to welcome you, Acharya Rajput, by one Vedic hymn and a Sanskrit shloka.
She'll take that, we'll reduce her, and she's another collaborating organization.
Ishetvorjetva vayavatsopayavatsa devo vasavita prarpayat sreshtatamaya karmana apyayatvamakniya deva bhagamurjasvati payasvati prajavati ranamiva ayakshma मावत्सेन ये सधा माघुसहुंसो रुद्रस्य हेतिः परिवो वृणक्तु ध्रुवा अस्मिन् गोपतौ स्यात् बह्वीर्यजमानस्य पशून् पाहि ऋषेत्रिचत्वारिगं सत् Ishas Urjas. The one line meaning of this is the jiva through yajna gets the anubhuti.
Gets
Anubhuti.
Anubhuti. Yeah.
Saman.
Yes.
Ruk through yajas becomes Saman.
Some.
And that is the welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam.
So, she is going to say something about Sapna. She is one of the...
Before that, I just want to give, because Professor is talking about Sanskrit.
You want to say now? Or?
Just one more.
One more, of
please.
course.
Let's just
Aindavya kalayavatam shivataro vistaranadaatmakam tatrupam janani smarami paramam chinmatramekam tava yadrodeti parabhida bhagavati tasam hitasam padam pasyanti tava madhyama vijayate swairam hisa vaikhari. You are here as the Vaikhari. Welcome.